Good morning, third grade. I'm behind this morning because I just keep thinking that Llama's going to have a baby. And so I spent all this time out in the um, yard with her, like following her around, like, is anything going on back there? But nothing that I could see. So uh, I promise I will update you when it happens. Probably won't happen for 2 weeks. Remember that we are on Chapter 9, Grim Defeat, and Sirius Black is in the castle. Professor Dumbledore sent all the Gryffindors back to the Great Hall, where they were joined 10 minutes later by students from Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, who all looked extremely confused. "The teachers and I need to conduct a thorough search of the castle," Professor Dumbledore told them in a loud voice as Professor McGonagall and Flitwick closed all the doors into the hall. "I'm afraid that for your own safety, you will all have to spend the night here. I want the prefects to stand guard over the entrances to the hall, and I'm leaving head boy and head girl in charge. Any disturbance should be reported to me directly," he added to Percy, who was looking immensely proud and very important in this moment. "Send word with one of the ghosts." Professor Dumbledore paused, about to leave the hall, and said, "Oh yes, you'll be needing..." One casual wave of his wand, and the long tables flew to the edge of the great hall and stood themselves up against the wall. Another wave, and the floor was covered with hundreds of squishy, purple sleeping bags. "Sleep well," said Professor Dumbledore, closing the door behind him. The hall immediately began to buzz excitedly. The Gryffindors were telling the rest of the school what had just happened. "Everyone into your sleeping bags," shouted Percy Weasley. "Come on now, no more talking. Lights out in 10 minutes. "Come on," Ron said to Harry and Hermione as they seized 3 sleeping bags and dragged them into a corner. "Do you think Sirius Black's still in the castle?" Hermione whispered anxiously. "Dumbledore obviously thinks he might be," said Ron. "They're searching." "It's very lucky he picked tonight, you know," said Hermione as they climbed fully dressed into their sleeping bags and propped themselves onto their elbows to talk. Kind of like I'm sitting. "The one night we weren't in the tower, I reckon he lost track of time, being on the run," said Ron. "Didn't realize it was Halloween. Otherwise, he would have come bursting in here while we were eating." Hermione shuddered. All around them, people were asking each other the same question. How did he get in? "Maybe he knows how to apparate," said a Ravenclaw a few feet away. "Just appear out of thin air, you know? That's like teleporting for wizards. They call apparating and disapparating. It's like when they show up and then disappear." "Disguised himself, probably," said a Hufflepuff in his 5th year. He could have flown in, suggested Dean Thomas. "Honestly, am I the only person in this school who's ever bothered to read Hogwarts a history?" Hermione said crossly to Harry and Ron. "Probably," said Ron. "Why?" "Because the castle's protected by more than walls, you know," said Hermione. "There are all sorts of enchantments on it to stop people from entering by stealth, or stealthy means like sneakily. You can't just apparate in here, and I'd like to see the disguise that could fool those Dementors. They're guarding every single entrance to the grounds. They'd have seen him fly in, too. And Filch knows all the secret passageways. They've all been covered." "The lights are going out now," Percy shouted. "I want everyone in their sleeping bags, and no more talking." The candles all went out at once. The only light now came from the silvery ghosts who were drifting about talking seriously to the prefects, and the enchanted ceiling, which, like the sky outside, was scattered with stars. What with that and the whispering that still filled the hall, Harry felt as though he was sleeping outdoors in a light wind. Once every hour, a teacher would reappear in the hall to check that everything was quiet. Around 3 in the morning, when many students had finally fallen asleep, Professor Dumbledore came in. Harry watched him looking around for Percy, who had been prowling between the sleeping bags, telling people off for talking, yelling at them for talking. Percy was only a short way from Harry, Ron, and Hermione, who quickly pretended to be asleep, as Dumbledore's footsteps drew nearer. "Any sign of him, Professor?" asked Percy in a whisper. "No. All well here?" "Everything is under control, sir." "Good. There's no point in moving them all out now. I found a temporary guardian for the Gryffindor portrait hole. You'll be able to move them back in the morning." "And the fat lady, sir?" "Hiding in a map of Argentina on the second floor. Apparently, she refused to let Black in without the password, so he attacked her. She's still very distressed, but once she's calmed down, I'll have Mr. Filch restore her. Harry heard the door of the hall creak open again and more footsteps. Headmaster? It was Snape. Harry kept quite still, listening to every word as hard as he could. The whole of the third floor has been searched, and he's not there. And Filch has done the dungeons. Nothing there either. What about the astronomy tower? Professor Trelawney's room? The owlry? All searched. Very well, Severus. I didn't really expect Black to linger. Have you any theory of how he got in, Professor? Asked Snape. Harry raised his head very slightly off his arms to free his other ear. Many, Severus. Each of them as unlikely as the next. Harry opened his eyes a fraction and squinted up to where they stood. Dumbledore's back was to him, but he could see Percy's face, rapt with attention, and Snape's profile, so like the side of him, which looked angry. You remember the conversation we had, Headmaster, just before the, start of the term, said Snape, who was barely opening his lips as though trying to block Percy out of the conversation. I do, Severus, said Dumbledore, and there was something like warning in his voice. It seems almost impossible that Black could have entered the school without inside help. I did express my concerns when you appointed, I do not believe a single person inside this castle would have helped Black enter it, said Dumbledore, and his tone made it very clear that the subject was closed, and Snape didn't reply. I must go down to the Dementors, said Dumbledore. I said I would inform them when our search was complete. Didn't they want to help, sir? Said Percy. Oh, yes, said Dumbledore coldly. But I'm afraid no Dementor will cross the threshold of this castle while I'm headmaster. It's very clear that Dumbledore does not like those Dementors. Percy looked slightly abashed. Dumbledore left the hall, walking quickly and quietly. Snape stood for a moment watching the headmaster with an expression of deep resentment on his face. Then he, too, left. Harry glanced sideways at Ron and Hermione. Both of them had their eyes open, too, reflecting the starry ceiling. What was that all about? Ron mouthed. It's the next morning. The school talked of nothing but Sirius Black for the next few days. The theories about how he had entered the castle became wilder and wilder. Hannah Abbott from Hufflepuff spent much of their next herbology class telling anyone who'd listen that Black could turn into a flowering shrub, and that's how he got in. The flat lady's ripped canvas had been taken off the wall and replaced with the portrait of Sir Cadogan and his fat gray pony. Remember, this is the guy in the portrait that they saw on their way up to, the crazy guy that they saw on their way up to their first divination lesson way earlier in the book. Nobody was very happy about this. Sir Cadogan spent half his time challenging people to duels, and the rest thinking up ridiculously complicated passwords, which were changed at least twice a day. He's barking mad, said Seamus Finnegan angrily to Percy. Can't we get anyone else in our portrait to volunteer? None of the other pictures wanted the job, said Percy, frightened of what happened to the fat lady. Sir Cadogan was the only one brave enough. Sir Cadogan, however, was the least of Harry's worries. He was now being closely watched. Teachers found excuses to walk along corridors with him and Percy Weasley, acting, Harry suspected, on Mrs. Weasley's orders. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Teachers found excuses to walk along corridors with him, and Percy Weasley, acting on what Harry suspected were Mrs. Weasley's orders, was tailing or following him everywhere like an extremely pompous guard dog. Pompous means like arrogant, nose in his ear. To cap it all off, Professor McGonagall summoned Harry into her office with such a somber expression on her face, Harry thought someone must have died. There's no point in hiding it from you any longer, Potter, she said in a very serious voice. I know that this will all come to a very serious shock. But Sirius Black, I know he's after me, said Harry warily. I heard Ron's dad telling his mom, Mr. Weasley works for the Ministry of Magic. Professor McGonagall seemed very taken aback. She stared at Harry for a moment or two and then said, I see. Well, in that case, Potter, you'll understand why I don't think it's a good idea for you to be practicing Quidditch in the evenings. Out on the pitch with only your team members, it's just that you're very exposed, Potter. We've got our first match on Saturdays, said Harry, outraged. I've got to train, Professor. Professor McGonagall considered him intently. Harry knew she was deeply interested in the Gryffindor team's prospects. It had been she, after all, who suggested that Harry become the seeker for the team in the first place. He waited, holding his breath. Anna and Hensley, could you all stop talking to each other? I can see that you are passing notes, right back and forth. I don't know why you're passing notes, because you're also just talking. So, could you just not? Thanks. You're brilliant. You're both brilliant. Love that you're engaged in whatever it is you're engaged in. Love it. But let's focus on the book. All right. Oh, you two. Said Professor McGonagall. She stood up and stared out the window at the Quidditch pitch, just visible through the rain. Well, goodness knows I'd like to see us win the cup at last. But all the same, Potter, I'd be happier if a teacher were present. I'll ask Madam Hooch to oversee your training, so to watch the training. The weather worsened steadily as the first Quidditch match drew near. Undaunted, the Gryffindor team were training harder than ever under the eye of Madam Hooch. Then, at their final training session before Saturday's match, Oliver Wood gave his team some unwelcoming news. We're not playing Slytherin, he told them very angrily. Flint's just been to see me. We're playing Hufflepuff instead. Why? Said the rest of the team all together. Flint's excuse is that their seeker's arm is still injured, said Wood, grinding his teeth fiercely. But it's obviously why they're doing it. They don't want to play in this weather. They think it'll ruin their chances. There had been strong winds and heavy rain all day, and as Wood spoke, they heard a distant rumble of thunder. There's nothing wrong with Malfoy's arm, said Harry furiously. He's faking it. I know that, but we can't prove it, said Wood bitterly. And we've been practicing all those moves assuming we're playing Slytherin and instead it's Hufflepuff. And their style is quite different. They've got a new captain and seeker, Cedric Diggory. Angelina, Alicia, and Katie all suddenly giggled. What? Said Wood, frowning at this light-hearted behavior. He's that really tall, good-looking one, isn't he? Said Angelina. Strong and silent, said Katie, as they started to giggle again. He's only silent because he's too thick to string two words together, said Fred impatiently. I don't know why you're worried, Oliver. The Hufflepuff team is a pushover. Last time we played them, Harry caught the snitch in about 5 minutes, remember? We were playing in completely different conditions, Wood shouted, his eyes bulging slightly. Diggory's put up a very strong team together. He's an excellent seeker. I was afraid you'd be like this. We can't relax. We need to keep our focus. Slytherins are trying to wrong foot us, which means turn us over. We have to win. Oliver, calm down, said Fred, looking slightly alarmed. We're taking Hufflepuff very seriously. Seriously. All right, I'm going to stop there. Grim Defeat is the name of the chapter. We just finished the beginning. I hope that you guys have a wonderful day. I hope that you got to play outside in the sun after the rain yesterday. It was really warm and nice. And I hope that you get to play outside a little bit today, too. Get some fresh air. All right, I miss you guys a lot. And, hopefully I will see you in a week and a half. Fingers crossed.